Thank you all very much for joining this virtual talk provided by artist, author, and historian Karen Rinaldo and her colleague Kevin Doyle, who is an author, historian, and lecturer. Karen and Kevin both love history, and while researching for Karen's famous painting, The First Thanksgiving, 1621, they were influenced to write their book, In the Wake of the Mayflower, The First Encounter. Karen is a visual historian whose work has shown at museums on the Green, Plymouth Pilgrim Hall Museum, and her 1621 painting was at Plymouth Plantation from 1995 to 2007. Kevin is a combat veteran, historian, and lecturer who writes about historic places and events that are becoming a fading memory, but whose story should be recorded. Karen and Kevin, thank you so much for inviting us, the Texas Mayflower Society, into your talented and exciting world.
Pleasure. Thank you, Peggy. We have a few thank yous and a nice introduction to make, but we would like to give a great shout out to the great state of Texas for hosting this. And
absolutely.
Yeah, Prairie Kuntz, is that how you pronounce your last name?
Counts, like ounce with a C in front of it.
Yes, Governor of the Texas Mayflower Society. Sandra Sowers, who I had seen like a 2-inch little article in one of the Mayflower Quarterly magazines back over a year ago. And I had mentioned to Kevin, I think that they're showing in one of their box displays the First Thanksgiving painting. I'm going to get in touch with her, she's a teacher, and see if we get some response. Well, the rest, as they say, was history, and Sandra responded, and we've had this relationship going for quite a long time. And Peggy Marsh, your assistance has been invaluable. It's been delightful to communicating with you back and forth. And also to Beth Lambright, the Mayflower Society Governor of Oregon. Who was on, and thank you, Beth. You have been in communication with me several times. You came here to Museums on the Green. You visited with Kevin and myself. You saw the painting. And so our friendship has gotten deeper, and we're very appreciative of everything you do. To Mark Schmidt, who has been our executive director for 10 years here at Museums on the Green, and most recently was invited and took an appointment at the General Mayflower Society in Plymouth, Mass. He's been there for about a month now. He is hosting our presentation this afternoon, and he's down in Plymouth. And Mark, we are grateful to you, not only for your work that you've done here at the museum, but the great job we know you'll be doing in Plymouth.
Do you want to come on, Mark, and say hi?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, everybody. You know, Karen, you're giving me far too much credit. It's only been 9 days, so they said I did well enough that I can come back for week 3. So it's also while they're on, congratulations to Bart Henson for being named the Treasurer General of the entire society. He's on, and also thank you to Beth Lambright, who was there, as Karen mentioned, and welcomed, saw the painting and welcomed me in person. So she got to find out the news before everybody else. So my thank you to everybody for for 10 great years in Falmouth, and I'm looking forward to being the executive director in Plymouth. I'm very much looking forward to this.
And there's no doubt in my mind, I can assure 30,000 people that you're going to enjoy Mark's leadership there as the executive director, and his teamwork and association. He's a 100%er.
Do you want to, at this point, give a nod to Vincent, the student?
And while we're here, we also understand that there are a number of juniors that are on the call as well. and we really have enjoyed talking about them with some of you elders, I guess, and in the society, and reading some of the essays and talking about their accomplishments and so forth. One stood out to us, which to me especially, was Vincent Miceli, who I suspect is probably sitting out there, perhaps with his parents and grandparents. And perhaps because I was a scout myself, and he has achieved the very high and honorable rank that never leaves you in your entire lifetime as an Eagle Scout. And congratulations, and not just barely an Eagle Scout, but he has enough merit badges to be an Eagle Scout twice over. 55 as I counted them.
Impressive,
very impressive, and a very impressive story. And I'm sure that Robert Morris, his ancestor, would be very proud of him. And we'll talk about Robert Morris as we go through the presentation as well. Right now, I think it'd be interesting to hear from Karen, especially about not only the painting, which everybody has become quite familiar with, but in some ways it could be like a one-hit wonder if you thought about it. You know, that seems to be all that most people know is that painting, which is not a bad thing. But I think you'd be interested to back up a little bit, especially some of you of the juniors who might be thinking about your own career and what do you want to be. Karen's wanted to be an artist for all of her life. And she has racked up a number of accomplishments, getting to the point where she was recognized and requested to be the person who executed this painting, which was commissioned to be a gift to the nation by the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, which claims to be the Pilgrims Church. It draws a straight line all the way. 100 years ago, they commissioned a silver tablet to be encrusted at the Peterskirk in Leiden of Reverend Robinson. And then for their 75th anniversary, as well as the 400th anniversary now of the Mayflower's first Thanksgiving, Karen was selected to be the visual artist who carries that forward into history. So Karen, you want to tell us how that came to be?
So the commission was back in 1994. And my first concern was the information available, and would there be enough information to create such a painting? And so there was a lot of question, a lot of research that went into just addressing that one point. And so I worked closely from the beginning with Pilgrim Hall Museum and Plymouth Plantation, with one of the indigenous people there by the name of, his last name was Pollard, but he went by Nanny Passionate. And that was a critical point, to have his assistance in creating the structure, the layout of how the natives would have been presented at this time. Their demeanor, just their whole temperament, what they would be wearing. It was everything that would go into their presence. And the painting, even without any words attached to it, the expression, a picture paints 1,000 words, carries a message with it. And we'll talk about that as we get deeper into the image. But to the point of how did they come to find me? How did they select me for the work? I think you'll go over here to this point here. So prior to the commissioning, for about 3 years, from 74 to 76, I was very busy working on all of the 15 Cape Cod towns leading up to the bicentennial. And I had worked on Cape Cod as one centerpiece, but then developed pieces for all of the towns. So the whole idea behind a montage was to include as many landmarks as possible, and obviously they're all historical, and with a dynamic center focus. Mashpee was one of the first that I worked on. This was done in 1974. And this carried through one at a time, going in and examining the towns, traveling up and down side roads and back roads, and becoming familiar with the personality of each town.
And if I may say about Mashpee,
Okay.
that has been a land that the Wampanoags have occupied forever. We all speak very fondly, obviously, of the Wampanoag tribe, and Karen has depicted the current leader right there in the center. And actually, Wampanoags wore just a little bit of a sprig on top of their head. They didn't wear the full headdress. The full headdress was worn by the supreme sachem.
Yeah, and this was a sachem from Martha's Vineyard, actually.
And
then the other figure would be Chief Flying Eagle, who has made a comment early on in our book, but that would be Earl Mills, and he was also part of that center focus.
And his comment was that he's happy that somebody is finally looking at this period of time with a positive eye. And I think we as, I say we as Mayflower descendants, my wife is a Mayflower descendant, and all of my children are, and they like to remind me that I am the one who is not. I like to remind them but I'm the one who wrote the book. So nevertheless.
So Mashpee was a very important town to try to convey that message of the history and their land and just the sensitivity to all of that. And so I went forth with one for Boston, including the prominent landmarks there. And so this was a course of 3 years of dedication just to bicentennial work. And then included within, there was 27 years that had been dedicated to a lot of historical subjects. So the NACCC, the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, they were looking for someone who could be committed to a piece for a period of time. This was another design that was done for Mashpee. A person who could be dedicated over a period of time and who had an interest in historical subjects and in making a promise then would be able to carry that through. So after doing the research, I still was a little unsure if this would really be possible. And I had asked a gentleman by the name of James Baker, who is a very prolific writer in Plymouth. He was a director at Plymouth Plantation at the time. And I just point blank asked, do you think this is possible? Because it was pretty daunting. I mean, you have the responsibility of creating these figures and relaying a real time in our history. And he simply said, if you take this on a puzzle piece at a time, I think it can be accomplished. And that was what I needed to hear. And so I then set forth within a constricted period of time of what might have been 9 months, but closer to the 6 months, their deadline for their 40th anniversary out in Wisconsin, and completed the piece with research and execution of the work in that 6 month period of time.
If I might,
Yeah.
we inserted also this montage of Katherine Lee Bates, who you all know as America the Beautiful, and we all know as the Falmouth girl down the road. She did not look like Mary Poppins there on the left-hand side. She looked very much more like the professor that she was in the center.
And that was the way she was illustrated by the person who was creating that piece of work, that monument.
That's a monument that's out there. But so this is another thing that Karen did. She also did one for Tony Bennett, by the way, at the request of Joan Kennedy, which she doesn't like to include a whole lot, but I think it's really kind of remarkable that there's Tony Bennett with the hundreds of songs that he recorded that she had annotated all around the edge.
It was an amazing piece. He had a great comment on when he saw that.
He said, I was going to write my autobiography, but I don't have to anymore.
Yeah.
It's all right here.
Just as a side note, a little interesting point, the notes this was done on Masonite. It's a large piece. In fact, we're broadcasting from the Cultural Center at Museums on the Green, and we're about 10 feet from the original First Thanksgiving painting.
Yeah.
And we chose the Cultural Center because of the acoustics. We were afraid that there'd be a little more muffled sound. So we have a print behind us of the reproduction of the painting, but yeah, we're 10 feet from the original. But the notes on the painting of the Katherine Lee Bates, America the Beautiful, are raised so that if one was visually impaired, they could feel the notes to the song.
And that's the level of detail that Karen goes into, and that's what all of this stuff adds up to the recognition when the NACCC came to her and asked her to accept this commission. I think it's worthy of note as well that painting that we just talked about of America the Beautiful was also chosen by the New York Art Seminar to discuss exactly what we just talked about very briefly. So it came as no surprise, and we credit Mark Schmidt, who you've just heard from. You know, when he saw this, when he saw what Scholastic Books had done in teaching American history with art masterpieces, he looked at that and he said, hey, that's Washington crossing the Delaware. That's the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. That's the Civil War. That's the westward expansion. And that's Karen Rinaldo. He said, we must have a treasure here that we don't realize that we have. And so, Mark, we thank you very much for recognizing that and bringing it not only here, but also to the society.
Yeah, you know, Mark sent a letter out and had conversations with the director there at the NACCC. And fortunate, we were able to get a loan. And then we had the painting, accepted it here on the campus of MOG. And it was, now where do we put it? So there was a temporary housing set up in, this was the Conant House. And next to the painting, you see a drawing, and that was what the historians would have signed off on before going to the painting stage. So that is framed. So we have a temporary housing, and I might just say at this point that I do not own the painting. The NACCC owns the painting. But fortunately, one of the board directors suggested strongly that I hold the copyright. And I do. And because I have had the copyright, I can give permission then to organizations or individuals, film companies, or whoever, to use the work in whatever means they'd like to. So the temporary housing stood for a period of months. COVID hit. And in the meantime,
yeah, before we flip it off, I just wanted to call attention to that particular painting, because that starts to convey to you as a viewer from where you are, the vividness of the painting. You've seen lots of images by now. That's why you've given us some time this afternoon to talk about it. You've seen some images until you see it. And Beth can probably attest to this as well.
Right.
Beth has seen it live and in person, 5 feet wide, 3 feet high. And its vividness really bespeaks its presence.
Yeah, and the interesting companion piece to that, I think, because it is the thinking process. Yeah, it's letting people inside my head to see the drawing. And as I said, the historians would check off each area and correct anything. There are some X marks. It's just a very visual presentation of the process, and I can't say enough about the process. So this end section, this L coming off of the Wicks house, is where the present location is, the housing of the First Thanksgiving painting. And the peripheral of the room tells the life. It literally took on a life of its own when it left my hands. And so the peripheral of the room has some different displays and stories about just that time.
What's interesting is you see here the pencil drawing that Karen created over an iterative process to make sure she had 90 Braves accounted for and the 53 Mayflower survivors at that point in in probably mid-October or so by the time they had the harvest came in. But anyway, as you look at it, it's worn a little bit. It's a flimsy paper.
It's
tracing paper. And in the upper right-hand corner, it's worn just a little bit. And somebody turned to Karen at one point and said, wow, it survived very well after 400 years. Do I have a question over here? Yes, sir. Did you have a comment to make on it?
Yeah, I did. So where is that? I'd like to visit that.
Yeah, so this is in Falmouth, Massachusetts. It's at Museums on the Green, the Falmouth Historical Society.
Thank you.
So yeah, so the drawing was on tracing paper. It was framed actually recently within the last 5 years, and it's carboned on the backside, and then that would be taken to the canvas for the next step of drawing. It goes through several stages of drawing and redrawing, so that now you have an image on the canvas, and then redraw that again so you have a more definite display of the impression.
Hey, Kurt, if you come up, let us know, Kurt.
Yeah, but also.
I spend summers on Cape Cod, so I'll be there next August.
Oh, terrific.
Nice.
Yeah, you come on down. Karen's Gallery is on Main Street.
So
We'll take care of it.
the unveiling of the piece, it had to be created by June. And so the painting had been created. It was sent out to Logan Airport. It was shipped out to Wisconsin, and then it was shipped back to Massachusetts, where it was unveiled at Pilgrim Hall in 1995.
And look at that. That to me right there, I stop at that one every time.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to imagine. That's
kind of a
Pilgrim
ghostly
Hall.
Image, yeah.
And I said to Karen, you ought to make that into your bedspread.
I had no idea they were
That's
putting a
amazing.
banner out.
Yeah.
I was actually a busload of people that went down to see the unveiling and the presentation. And it was quite a moment. It was a humbling moment to be inside the Pilgrims Museum, Pilgrim Hall, and have this piece unveiled. And in the background, we had several illustrations that went through the process. But because I couldn't be a part of their ceremony, their 40th anniversary, I did have the foresight to create a 14-minute video that documents every stroke in the painting. And that's playing on a loop screen at the Museum on the Green. I haven't released it to the public, although it's been requested by many people, and some have said, why don't you put it out on a YouTube? I feel that it's pretty precious, and I'm a little bit protective of it. And I think that it really goes with a presentation, that you need to have that playing of the history behind the painting when you're doing a presentation.
And Beth has seen it. She can attest to that.
Yes. So the National Museum of the American Indian in 2007 did an article.
Did Peggy want to say something? Hey, we can't hear you, Peggy.
That's okay. Someone just emailed me that they couldn't get in, so I was just helping them, but thank you. Keep going. It's so interesting. Thank you.
In 2007, the National Museum of the American Indian had reproduced the image of the 1621 painting, and they had an article within it where they talk about other works of art that had depicted a Thanksgiving theme, but that this piece, the Queen's Plantation exhibit Thanksgiving featured this painting, the first Thanksgiving, 1621 by Karen Rinaldo, commissioned in 1994 to give an accurate picture of the native presence. Now, previous well-known paintings by N.C. Wyeth and others included a handful of Indians. Rinaldo portrayed the historically accurate proportion of 91 Penard guests and 52 English colonists. And that was the Art of Thanksgiving that took place at Pilgrim Hall after that unveiling. And of course, there's the Ginny Brownstone painting, which is beautiful and part of their collection. There was some Norman Rockwell illustrations. It was a very impressive, again, a very humbling thing to be a part of their exhibit. This most recently, for the 400th celebration in Plymouth, they created a book called Massachusetts Chronicles. It was created collaboration by Linda Coombs, a Wampanoag from Aquinnah, and a gentleman from England. And the way the book was constructed, it was as if a reporter was on the scene at the time of history taking place. And so this reporter was reporting, I'm here at the first Thanksgiving, and goes on to explain the scenario. So it's 400 years of history, and the idea then behind the book was that it go into the school systems in Massachusetts, which it did. And again, an honor to be part of that. And so 27 years later, this painting has inspired our book. And so people, they say, how long did it take you to write the book? We say 27 years. And for years, I've known Kevin for decades. And as Kevin said, painting was really all I ever wanted to do as a child. And when Kevin, he spent his life in the military, and you never really leave the military. I've seen him in action many times. But he wanted to get involved with history and subjects that are kind of fading from the landscape, and do some lecturing. And writing was very important. And I would say to him, Kevin, you know, there's a book in this painting. There's something here to be told.
And after a year or so, I finally saw what you were talking about.
Thankfully, he finally listened.
It's 27 years plus one more year.
Yeah. And so the book was released. We decided to self-publish it. There wasn't even time to find a publishing company. And then the next week, the pandemic hit, and we still managed to get the book into like 7 museum stores and gift shops and bookstores on the Cape from Plymouth to Provincetown, actually.
So what we thought we'd do is tell you a little bit about the book as well. And then we'll come back and pick up all the questions from whatever you might have about the painting and so forth. But in the book, what we try to do is we go back and we look at Nauset as it was, and we pick it up at 1602 because that's when the English explorer Bartholomew Gosnold came up and he named Martha's Vineyard after his sister, and the Elizabeth Islands are named after the Queen. He gave Cape Cod its name because it was so plentiful in codfish at the time. Cod like their bottom feeders, they live in a natural habitat, which has mostly been scrubbed away by those draggers that you see. But nevertheless, in the day, it was plentiful with cod. We pick up the Pilgrim story from when they really left from England and went to Amsterdam for a couple of years, then into Leiden, and then their arrival here in Plymouth, which was built over the Nauset, the Wampanoag village of Patuxent. Well, and then I'll pick it up, and then it goes for the next 50 years of relative peace and goodwill between the Wampanoag tribe and the Mayflower survivors. And then because of that montage sequence that Karen introduced at the beginning, that's the that was the sequence of the book. Mm-hmm. So we bring Cape Cod right up to date. So the question comes up sometimes about people, well, did they know they were pilgrims? And, you know, oh, they weren't called pilgrims until the 1800s, and you hear that sort of thing. Well, here's Geoffrey Chaucer speaking in 1387, okay, 200 years before, you know, wander April with the shooter so to the dirk to march that pierced to the road, which I say in Anglo-Saxon, so my mother will be proud of me. But every April, them longing folk to go on pilgrimages, right then and there. And where would they go? Especially from every year's end of England to Canterbury. And they went to Canterbury to buy their indulgences to get to heaven. So they were very familiar with going on pilgrimages. This is a scene from the harbor in Amsterdam, what it would have looked like. a lot of people forget, that in 1600, Westminster Abbey was already 400 years old. The Pilgrims came from very fine buildings. We all know that because you're the choir. We're talking to the choir. You know all this, but people don't. They look at the Plymouth Village as it's constructed and think, wow, this is what they brought with them. This is how they live. No, that's not how they live.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the ship that looks like the Mayflower, there's plenty of those sailing around, and there's the Charlotte depicted also in Amsterdam Harbor. So really, we kind of go back to the Holy Roman Empire, which seems like a far way to go back to talk about the Pilgrims, but it really helps understand when the Holy Roman Empire, it was around for about 700 or 800 years when after the last emperor of the Empire of Rome fell, so it became the Holy Roman Empire when the Pope and his archbishops took over. And that was fine until about 1517, and you know the story. Martin Luther went to the church in Germany and said, no, this isn't right. You don't go to Canterbury to buy your ticket into heaven. And it started the Protestant Reformation, which about that same time, King Henry was married now to Catherine of Aragon for 20 years. He goes to the Pope and says, hey, I need a new wife. I don't have an heir. And the Pope says, nope, you're not going to get it here. And so Henry VIII says, fine, I'll have my own religion. And it was that religion that the Puritans then turned and said, wait a second, you're still sort of along the same track in too many ways. We think that the Bible is the directive. And really we should be working from the Bible. Those were the Puritans, of which some Puritans said, well, if we stay within the church, we can remedy the church. And some said the only way you're going to fix this is by separating. And that was the Pilgrims. That's us.
And those were the separatists.
Those were the separatists. And they knew they were Pilgrims. And William Bradford even says so in 1630 when he writes, and they left their goodly place of Pleasant City, which had been their resting place for almost 12 years. That would be Holland, obviously. But they knew they were Pilgrims. And they looked not so much on those things, but they lifted up their eyes to the heavens and to the new country, and that quieted their spirits.
Now, they've left a lot behind. And one of the other reasons they're leaving Leiden is because they're watching a greater influence change their children, I think. And,
yeah.
And that became an important factor to them, along with other reasons.
So as they're crossing the ocean, of course, 3 days before they, you know the story, 3 days before they land, they get blown off course, they get blown north. And this kind of depicts that. They go to round around Cape Cod. Well, for those of you in the great state of Texas might not know much about the Cape Cod elbow sticking out into the ocean. It's all caused by glacial melt. And it's a great big sand pile. And what you see down there at the elbow, that's happening here. We're sorry about that. But you see here at the elbow, if you tried to round the end of the Cape, you'd run aground. They were aiming for the mouth of the Hudson River. So they sought refuge back up in Provincetown.
Yeah, and I just make a comment on, because I refer to this as, one may say that's a very hopeful image, and I feel that it's a very desperate image. Again, they've left their families behind. They've left their possessions behind. They've left a way of life behind. And, you know, the best intentions of how you plan a trip, it's the unknown factors of what you might encounter. And I'd like to think that they had some idea of the land that they were coming to by word of other expeditions that had been made by other people who had been here, but maybe not. But they were in for a very tough journey. They picked a rough time to be making the trip. And so there was a lot against them right from the beginning, right from the get-go. So that is a very desperate image to me.
We show this, this is Bartholomew Guys, we talk about 1602. There's the Mayflower. You're all very familiar with the ship. We had the advantage of being right here on Cape Cod. We saw the replica come through the canal just a few months back, just before the summer, and it was really exciting. It was exciting not just to see the Mayflower, but to see the excitement around the Mayflower. Look at that flotilla all around it, and that was fun to see.
Yeah, it was very exciting. We got there.
Oh, Kurt, were
early.
you there?
We watched the excitement build, and before we knew it, there were thousands of people lining the canal.
So here they come and they land in the first landing place. There's a monument there in Provincetown. That's about where they landed. We built this monument to it in what, 1930, someplace in there. It's the highest point on Cape Cod. And you can see it from just about everywhere in Cape Cod.
Right.
And it was there before they got off that they constructed the Mayflower Compact.
Yeah, and we have a copy of this in the room, and as I'm doing the peripheral of the room, we get to the Mayflower Compact, a very precious document, and we talk about it in the sense that it's a body politic. This was written by the members of the crew, a diverse group from entrepreneurs to the average citizen. So this is really the body of people creating a governorship for them. They know that if they don't have something intact when they land, the people will start jumping ship. And this has to be, I think this is actually written in their minds as they're on their journey. And I also think that the fingerprints of Reverend Robinson, who they loved, I mean, he was a beloved spiritual advisor to the Pilgrims. He hands them off a note, a very inspiring note as they're taking their journey. And I think that it was his sentiment that resonated with them and helped them to create this compact, which wasn't called a compact when it was created. It was called a combination. It was an agreement, but we refer to it as a covenant because of its underlying religious tone. It's a do good policy, really.
It really is, and it's very congregationalist in its spirit, and mutually combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation, to enact such just and equal laws as shall be for the general good, and unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. So what they've done is they've created a democratic governance. And when you think about that, and again, you've thought about that, it's a remarkable document. All through the history, up until that point, somebody had always told you what to do. You were all worked for a king or an emperor or some kind of an empire, and you were told from the top down what to do. And here, they don't have a king.
But they're still giving their allegiance to the king. And the fact that it's written 3,000 miles from their home is an amazing part of this story as well.
But in the meantime, they are totally self-sufficient, and they have their independence. They know they don't want monarchy, but they don't want an anarchy either. So it's sort of the American spirit. We're not the United States of America at this point. We're America. You know, we're as was described by Vespucci and everybody else who had come. But we continue to pay homage to the compact, and it's there underneath the Pilgrim Monument. Again, it may takes a little license with it,
yeah,
but by the same token, what we do in the history of the book, and as we look at it, we go to the primary source, which everybody goes to, Mort's relation.
Well, we rely on Mort's relation, and we've talked about this many times. It's the immediacy of the entries. These people were in survival mode 24/7.
Yeah.
And they didn't have time to be writing extensive notes. And so the notes that have been preserved in what's relation really do go to their state of mind and what they were encountering on a daily basis.
And so we follow that pretty closely, and we like that.
So we have the first landing. This is just pinpointing the expedition points from Provincetown over to Pilgrim Springs and Truro, Corn Hill, first encounter down in Eastham, and then over, they take the shallop over to Plymouth to start the colonization there. So one of the first points is the first spring where they have their first sip of fresh water, remembering that they're in terrible their conditions are just miserable. Having survived the journey, they're starving. So they have this first sip of fresh water at Pilgrim Springs. And this is a little marker that shows Pilgrim Pond, part of their traversing, getting over to Corn Hill and Truro. And there's another image coming up of the pond area. The landscape hasn't really changed much. I think it's pretty well the way they may have observed it. Pretty rough terrain. Yeah, this is a long distance shot of Corn Hill in the distance and a typical landscape. Again, there's a monument on the left-hand side by the flagpole that talks about their ascending out the top of the hill. And Corn Hill narrative from What's Relation. This is a point that we are in contrast to other historians and what they say. But from What's Relation, it reads, "We digged up a great kettle full of very fair corn. If we could find any of the people, we would give them the kettle again and satisfy them for their corn, which place we called Corn Hill." And they're always giving their praise and thanks to God. And so they say, and sure, it was God's good providence that we found this corn, for else we know not how we should have done. As soon as we can meet conveniently with them, we will give them full satisfaction. And so we say, yes, they did take the corn. This was not of their possession. They took something from someone else. But we're not using the words that they stole the corn, because in fact, they did make compensation to the natives. And we'll find that point as we go along in this presentation.
Yeah, and this is the statue that you see, 16, or the monument, 16 pilgrims with Miles Standish were there at Corn Hill. And the point being, and there's the monument right at the very top of the hill.
Yeah, it's pretty obscure. It's in a brushes
Yeah.
covering it practically.
It is overgrown. But again, this was the end of the glacier, and this is where it melted the most, and so it created a little hillock right there. Then as we looked across, this really inspired a lot of Karen's illustrations of the first encounter. And she was commissioned by the town of Eastham, which is where First Encounter Beach is, to create the montage for the 400th anniversary. We looked at that, and if you look at the point of where the land comes up, I guess there's no point in my pointing to it. If you look on the left-hand side where the land comes up, you know, my analysis, I'm pretty sure that that's about where the fight would have occurred. We're talking about a 15-minute battle. It was over. We learned a lot of military lessons from the natives. For example, one of the things that they did was in their method of war, even among the warring tribes, they would attack just before dawn. They'd try to catch their opponent while they were sleeping, and wake them up with these shrieks and a lot of pandemonium on the outside, disorient the opponent so that when they come out of their tents or they wake up drowsy, that's when they attack them. So that's what happened. And so now the Wampanoags is a tribe, the Braves, there's probably 15 to 30 of them, nobody counted them. And these are people that used to hunt rabbits with a bow and arrow. So you know that they're good. They could hit anything they wanted to with an arrow. The English had the blunderbuss. All they had to do was shoot the thing and somebody's going to get hurt. But as they leave the scene, there is no record of anyone being killed or injured. And we think that, again, this sort sense of divine providence, you know, is sort of already showing its hand on the relationship between the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims. This is the monument that was put up in 1920 for the 300th anniversary. And then subsequently, the Wampanoags put up this, which says the same, except it has a sentence in there that talks about the saving of the culture. And that's something that Karen and I were very attentive to as we wrote the book. And we think that it's the battle of the two cultures. And as they sailed away, they said, after we'd given God thanks, we took our shop and went on our journey and called this place the first encounter, a very neutral word.
Mild language.
So this is one of our takeaway lessons, I think. It was an inevitable encounter. People say, oh, well, you know, the Pilgrims, you know, if they want to blame the Pilgrims for a lot of stuff. And it just isn't so. I mean, the simple fact is that, you know, before Jamestown, there was the Lost Colony in North Carolina in 1594. And the Croatans had nothing to do with them. They wiped out the colony. That's the Lost Colony. 1607, they went down, and we all know the story of Pocahontas and so forth, saving John Smith. Otherwise, they were on their way to be driven out when Lord Delaware showed up with 150 more colonists for Jamestown. But in Plymouth, that wasn't the case. But all the inevitable encounters happened nevertheless. It's a new world, says we. Home ownership, cultivate the land, advancement of Christianity, honor the king, laws, ordinances, constitution. We'll call it New England. But at the same time, it's an ancient land. It's a tribal territory, hunting grounds, great spirit, summer camp, winter camp, sachems, braves, corn, squash, wildfowl. We call it Nauset. So the clash of cultures was inevitable. But how the clash would be resolved would determine the success of this attempt of the English to colonize in the land called America.
This shallop fascinated me, and it was a piece of what I called first prefab construction, so it was rather ingenious. And so it was in a couple of pieces, and it was used as protection. The Pilgrims would sleep in there. They would hide from the elements on the Mayflower. We went down for the reunion of bringing the shallop back to Plymouth. And these are some close-up shots of that. But it was a wonderful vessel that they could traverse inland waterways. They took it down to First Encounter and then made their way over to Clark's Island and then to the colonization there in Plymouth. But
and those familiar with the shallop say that it sails like a potato.
Oops. And this was a logo that was developed for Eastham for their 400th celebration. Interesting, they said they did not want any people in the design. And so very often I'll go to the subliminal to try to convey a message. And so I chose to use smoke coming up out of the dune to represent an encampment or just some life going on to show that there were people present. And this logo was used on banners. They had them around. They also made ornaments. They had T-shirts. They raised some money too from the funds that they received from that. And this was a montage, again, going back to the bicentennial and taking that same element of design, but using the center focus that I mentioned too, to take a dramatic point. And the shallop was really their signature piece for the centerfold.
Everything goes back to the treaty. You can't read that. I can hardly read it, but it was a fascinating thing. Again, we talked about the inevitable encounter, but on March 4th, this is 4 months after the Mayflower has landed. You know that they're under observation. You know that the Wampanoags had plenty of, weren't even spies. They were simply natives that would be reporting back. Massasoit was very much aware of what was going on, but he doesn't show up until March, 4 months after they're there. And when he does, on March 22nd, he meets with Governor Bradford, and the very day that they meet, there's two men of about the same age, about the same level of responsibility among their peoples, and they come up with this 6-point treaty. And basically, as Chief Flying Eagle said, it's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, is how he sums it up.
And I think they've come to the agreement that they knew they needed each other. The Pilgrims needed the natives for their subsistence, for their survival with food, and the natives had other tribes on their heels. They knew they needed the protection from them.
Karen likes to point out that one of the incredible coincidences is that as we go to look at the 400th anniversary, remember that in 1617 and 1618, 1619, the tribes were wiped out by a pandemic.
A plague.
The plague, the very same thing that now we're having 400 years later. And it's really just kind of a
it's an interesting
thing.
Coincidence, yeah.
So this is the words again from Mort's relation that sort of sets up what we think is very clearly a Thanksgiving Day. Our harvest being gotten in, the governor sent forth 4 men on fowling so that we might after a special manner rejoice together. Many of the Indians coming amongst us and amongst their greatest, King Massasoit, with some 90 men, and for 3 days. And what Karen has depicted is the first day of the 3 days. Kurt?
So were there any women there? Indian women?
That's a good question. So the natives, the whole assembly of why they were there was for protection, was to protect Massasoit. So they would not bring the women to this situation. I'll call it a situation first, and then it was an occasion second. But so no, that's why there is no presence of women. And that was another point that Nanny Pashamit, the gentleman who was in charge of Indigenous Affairs at Plymouth Plantation, he noted that was a question I had right away, and he noted on that one point too. So this is a legend.
I had a question. I'm sorry. This is Amy. Without the picture of myself. I had someone ask when they did this and they were feasting for the 3 days, how is it so few women would have cooked for so many people if they didn't have help?
Let's go to the image. So the legend identifies the population at the time of the 1621 feast, and the women would have been all that was left existing from a hard winter before. So that was the total population then at the time of the feast.
Exactly. So but they would have fed all of those other Indians that came with the king.
Well, they
right?
Not necessarily all the cooking done by the women, I wouldn't suspect. I don't know that there's much dialogue much reading that I've done anyway, that describes exactly what happened next. But we know that the Braves went off in one direction to shoot some deer and to go fowling, while the Mayflower were doing the same.
Right. Well, I thought the question was, why were the women doing the cooking? The women were doing.
I'm sorry. No, I just someone else was thinking when they were speaking to me about it that they thought that the women did the majority of the cooking. But my point to them was based off of that when they were having like the starving time and they were working more like a communist kind of thing, some of the younger men were staying with the women to help with the house chores because they were too lazy to go out and do the other things. So sorry, I don't want to have any conflict with it or anything, but I was just thinking that obviously, in my opinion, the men wouldn't have just not done any cooking at all, period. That's an awful lot of people to feed. And I can't imagine having over 90 Indians visiting and only a handful of people cooking for them.
In the video, I say, imagine taking care of women, you know, taking care of this number of people. You have 90 Braves, you have 91, including Massasoit. Imagine the enormity of such a thing when you are taking care of maybe 4 or 5 or 6 people at your Thanksgiving dinner. So the women took care of those who were ill. They and other members of the family would go out into the fields to harvest and take care of the fields in growing of crops. And the men were taking care of protection of the families, and I'm sure going out and to get whatever foods they would be eating. The natives, though, were bringing the deer. There's, you can see in the right-hand corner, if you have a picture of the first Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah, I've read Mort's Relation too, so I've gone over it a few times.
Right. But the women did do the majority of the cooking, and the women who were there were what was left from that tough first winter.
What's kind of interesting is if you look at this picture right here, and you look at the cut-off bodies that are just at the very top of it, there's 2 women carrying pies. Well, Philadelphia cream cheese came to Karen a year ago and said that they wanted to use they were going to be doing a marketing series on Philadelphia cream cheese. And what they did was they took that slice right there, the 2 women, and they came right down to the rest of the head table. They gave Karen credit in a full-page ad, which was just that one segment of the painting, artist by Karen Rinaldo. And it said, imagine why they came together, what fun they must have had when they had Philadelphia cream cheese pies.
Well, they turned Mayflower Society into the Cheesecake Society. Yeah. Of course, we know they weren't carrying cheesecake, but they were able to do kind of a little spoof on that.
Yeah,
but,
good marketing.
It was, and it was done in a very tasteful way.
Here's the head table with, and this shows a little bit of Karen's sense of humor on this, because whether they were sitting at a table, however it was, we know that Massasoit would have been talking with Carver and with Bradford and so forth, and the leaders that we all recognize. But as you look at that painting, from going down the people who are looking out at you, Edward Winslow is down seated next to the blonde-haired fellow there, sort of in the middle of the table, is John Alden.
Seated next to Miles Standish.
And right beside him, going the other way, is Miles Standish. And when you think of the story, speak for yourself, John. So she has Miles Standish and John Alden sitting side by side.
Because there was some romance apparently with Priscilla Mullins, who then becomes Priscilla Alden.
Speak for yourself,
Yeah,
John.
Speak for yourself, John. And Peggy had made an interesting observation. I'd like to just talk about this a little bit, and we're getting close on our time. So we have an empty chair, and that's a great observation. And what does an empty chair represent? In this case, Howland is seated next to that empty chair, and he had been a cousin of the Tilley family. And Elizabeth Tilley is one of the young girls. She was maybe 13 or so. They both became orphans. So the empty chair then, it could be a symbolism of a sort or represent that loss. An empty chair could also be trying to create a new direction or make right decisions. That's all associated with that that symbol. But I think going to this case where there had been a great loss, that would be more appropriate. And I'd like to address the gentleman who's having some conversation, some interaction with the natives to the far right side. And that would be Warren, who I believe is a descendant of Vincent Miceli's family. And he, interestingly, came here. He came to Plymouth alone. He left his family behind. He had a wife, he had 5 children, but he felt it was unsafe for them to travel at that time. And that was a very prudent decision to make. And they didn't return to Plymouth for 3 years. They came over on the Anne ship. So that was to his credit. He was protecting his family. But just to point out that another Mayflower descendant and from Barnstable, one of our largest towns on Cape Cod, was Mercy Otis Warren. And she was a descendant of Doty and Warren. And every year they do an inspirational award to a woman who has contributed a lot to the town. So they have the Mercy Otis Warren Award, but there were several other descendants well known. There was Franklin Roosevelt, there was Ulysses S. Grant, president. So Mayflower descendants go right down the line for representation.
We will close out with just an overlook at this painting once again. As you go back, we talked about Karen being a visual historian. As you look at it, you see the beginnings of civilization. You see the outlines of stone walls and fences, things that no native had ever seen before. It actually is the first street in America, Leiden Street, as we call it today. The site itself was excavated in 1947 by Harry Hornblower, who was a very wealthy Boston merchant whose hobby was archaeology, and he was fascinated by Plymouth. So the village itself, as you go and you visit it, was historically as accurate as it could possibly be determined. Mm. And then 30 years later, Karen came along and populated that village. So that's probably as close as you can come to a Kodak moment.
Well, it is. It's stepping back at that moment, at that particular time. I want to point out that the rock, Plymouth Rock, is added to the painting. And the rock is a thing of myth. So why would it be incorporated into a historically accurate painting? But it was determined by the historians, again, kind of the symbolism. The rock did represent the determination and the resilience and the fortitude of the Pilgrims. In constructing the painting, I just want to bring up this one point because it's important. People ask, how did you create each figure? And it's because there was so very little information about each person, you would go like a forensic scientist with whatever information was available and then create that image with that form in mind. We like to close on our presentation, not necessarily with a message that is ingrained in the image. There's something for everyone to take away their own personal thoughts. But my personal message would be that in 400 years, things really haven't changed very much in terms of we're still looking and searching for our freedoms, what we fight for. We try to keep our families safe. And the differences, there are far more similarities with cultures than differences. And I think if we keep that in mind, we'll find peace sooner than later. So if a picture paints 1,000 words, then we hope that's a message that you find as well.
Hey, thank you very much to everybody. Prairie, thank you very much for having us.
Oh, Karen and Kevin, we are very grateful to you. This has been the perfect 400th anniversary of the first Harvest Feast, a very special one for us. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
And thank you for your participation. We Come on, let us know if you're in town.
Yeah,
Definitely love to
we'll
see
give you
you.
a special tour.
Perfect.
Thank you all.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.